This looks harmless at first. But give it time, and it turns into something deeply unsettling. Because when 10,000 living mouths start eating at once, even a watermelon doesn't stand a chance. At first glance, mealworms don't look threatening. They're small, quiet, and slow, the kind of insect most people barely notice. But what makes them fascinating isn't their speed or strength. A watermelon isn't just big, it's nearly 92% water wrapped in a thick green rind designed by nature to protect the soft fruit inside. It feels like something insects shouldn't be able to overcome. But curiosity won, so I bought 10,000 mealworms and decided to let time do the work. Something simple. A piece of bread. The moment it touched the enclosure floor, the mealworms began to swarm. There was no hesitation, no confusion, just movement. Within minutes, they had formed a living mass over the surface, disappearing into cracks and edges. Over the next few hours, the bread began collapsing inward. Holes formed where there hadn't been any before. By the 4-hour mark, it was barely recognizable. Hollowed out, soft, falling apart under its own weight. That was just bread. The watermelon would be something else entirely. But before getting there, I wanted to capture a few other time-lapse experiments. Not because they were more extreme, but because they reveal something important about how slow biological processes can still be incredibly powerful. I set up an aquarium, filled it with water, and placed 5 leeches inside. Almost immediately, they began swimming in smooth, serpentine motions, occasionally attaching themselves to the glass using their suction cup ends. For food, I introduced a piece of beef liver. Getting leeches to feed is simple. Bring the food close, and they decide whether to latch on. When they do, you can actually see their bodies pulsing as they contract and pull nutrients inside. It's slow, methodical, and strangely mesmerizing. Not all of them stayed attached. Some detached and wandered away. But a few committed. And watching them feed over time showed just how much energy can be stored through patience rather than aggression. Next came flesh-eating beetles. Despite the name, they're not aggressive predators. They're cleaners, scavengers. In the wild, they play a vital role in breaking down dead animals, sometimes reducing an entire body to bone. In captivity, that process becomes visible. Thousands of beetle larvae moved as a single shifting surface. When a piece of dog food was introduced, it disappeared under them almost instantly. Within minutes, it was no longer an object. It was a moving shape. For a larger test, I introduced a duck head purchased legally as pet food. Over the course of 24 hours, the beetles stripped fur, softened tissue, and exposed bone. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. It was relentless. And by the end, the transformation was undeniable. Then there was the vinegaroon, a creature that looks like it came from another planet. I set up a clear enclosure with clay and soil, designed to force it to dig along the glass. At night, when the room was dark and quiet, it began excavating. Dirt piled up, tunnels formed. Watching it dig in time-lapse made one thing clear. Some of the most impressive behaviors in nature only reveal themselves when no one is watching. Finally, it was time. The mealworms returned. But before the watermelon, there was one last test. Styrofoam mealworms are known, based on documented research, to be capable of breaking down polystyrene with the help of gut bacteria. I placed a block inside the enclosure. Within hours, it was covered. By morning, holes had formed. Tunnels ran through the interior. The surface was scarred with bite marks. The material wasn't gone, but it had been fundamentally altered. Then came the watermelon. I cut it open and placed it directly into the enclosure, bright red, fresh, almost glowing under the light. The mealworms swarmed immediately, drawn to the moisture and sugar. At first, the change was subtle. A slight dulling of the color, tiny punctures on the surface, but over 12 hours, the transformation accelerated. The surface softened, the smell changed, the structure weakened. By morning, it was no longer food. It was decay. From above, it looked like the mealworms had lost interest. But underneath, the damage told the real story. Large sections of rind had been eaten through. Cavities formed where thousands of tiny mouths had worked in darkness. The watermelon hadn't disappeared, but it had been hollowed, compromised, reduced. That's the thing about these creatures. They don't overwhelm through force. They win by outlasting mealworms. Don't rush. They don't need to. Given time, access, and numbers, they can break down materials that seem impossible at first glance. Not because they're powerful, but because they're persistent. Watching it all unfold wasn't just gross. It was strangely satisfying. A reminder that nature doesn't always rely on speed or violence. Sometimes all it needs is patience. Thanks for watching.